I never thought that I would write a book. I never expected to be a widow at 30 either. But in 2019, my husband, the love of my life, died without any warning. What has kept me from drowning has been the people who love me the most, who have kept showing up even when they are uncomfortable. But I quickly realized that my experience was far from the norm. People who are suffering from loss often feel forgotten, abandoned, and misunderstood because we don't know how to support them. That's why I wrote this book. Grief Ally is for the person who wants to help but doesn't know how. If grief is like drowning in the ocean, this book is for the person holding the life preserver. It's a set of steps to help you keep your grieving friend's head above the water. What do I do? How do I help? How do I not make this worse? Grief Ally answers these questions and more. Showing up for the people we love who are in pain is hard, but it's one of the most important things that we can ever do. So with that, are you ready to be a grief ally?
Okay, everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have another author with me today. And one thing you're going to love, you heard it at the beginning here. We took a little clip from our guest website today. Got to go and watch the video on our website. And it's just beautiful. Aly's with us today. Aly, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. Nice to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me here. I'm so happy to chat with you and with everybody who's listening.
Amazing. And we just talked before we hit record about the video that's on your website under the book tab on your site. It's beautiful. Well done. Can you tell me a little bit about the idea about making that little clip that we just played here at the beginning of the episode?
Yeah. So first, I'll give a shout out to my friend Spencer Anderson, who's the one who created that film really for me. And I really wanted to give people a taste of what they were going to receive when they read my book, Grief Ally, and a bit of the rationale behind it. I think when you hear someone who has gone through something traumatic, lost a loved one, you automatically think that they're going to write a memoir telling their story of loss. And for me, this project was much more about creating a tool so that others could help people who were like in my situation. So I really wanted to kind of hammer that message home through what I called it a book trailer. Movies get trailers, books should get trailers too. And that was really exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I really just wanted to create something that gave people a little taste of what they were going to get from the book, as well as just like a real nod to the people who have given me, their unconditional love and attention and support through my bereavement experience, which is where the idea for the book really came from.
It's amazing. I haven't seen that on a lot of author pages, so I wanted to highlight that on your site because, again, I watched it like 4 or 5 times today, and it's just so well done, and it just kind of sets the mood, not just for the book and the website, but our time together too, which I'm really happy that we can kind of feature that as well. So, Aly, tell me a little bit about your story. Again, we don't want to give it all away because that's why there's a book, but give us a little bit of the background story to your story, and then we're going to kind of jump off from there. But can you kind of take us back in time and bring us up to speed?
Sure. So in 2019, I was moving along through life pretty well. I had a partner that I had chosen to spend the rest of my life with. I had a coaching business that was really starting to take off. And then all of a sudden, Will, my husband, partner in crime, died completely unexpectedly, instantly, suddenly. And I was thrown into the world of grief without any understanding of what it was like to live with a life-changing loss. And my experience of bereavement, very early on, it became apparent to me that it was different than what others were experiencing. I was told to go find community because, people my age, I was only 30 when this happened. Will was 29 when he died. And I was told by a grief expert, go find community because you're now living with something that, others your age don't really know what it's like. And so I tried connecting with so many people in Facebook groups, listening to their stories. And all that was really being shared was just this frustration of not feeling seen or understood. And there were some really real feelings of abandonment. And I don't think that is uncommon, unfortunately, in grief. But I wasn't experiencing that. There were people all around me who were showing up, making mistakes, and loving me through this as best as they could. And that's really where the idea of my book came from, is that I recognized that there was a problem in terms of when somebody dies, and it's not super close to you, but you are connected to that death somehow, and you want to show up for the people who are still around, who are deeply grieving. There isn't a resource to go to that tells you how to show up, particularly through the long haul. There's a bunch of suggestions out there about bring food, send a card, go to the ceremony, the funeral, the wake, the celebration of life, what have you. And then don't disappear. But I was thinking to myself, I'm like, that's not enough. If someone is, your best friend and you are trying to help them exist in a world and in a reality that they never would have chosen, you have to do more than bring food. And I'm not going to knock food. Food is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, what I like to say is like a lasagna will get you through the door, but what are you going to do once you're inside? And there's a particular set of skills and, just a mindset that's necessary to show up for someone through the long haul of grief.
Did you feel alone in community, even with other people who are experiencing loss or people who weren't experiencing loss, just family and friends and the community aspect of being together with people? Did you still feel alone during that?
Absolutely. And I think it's a natural part of when someone undergoes trauma, particularly if you experience it at an individual level. There's existential questions that come up, right? And ultimately, one of the greatest existential lessons of life is that we are alone, right? We are alone in how we experience the world and how we understand the world. And sometimes if you are partnered, you can kind of blur the lines a bit in terms of, your understanding and experience in the world. But losing that person, that for me, I think I used Will a lot as like a sounding board of just like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. Like, how are you experiencing this? And losing, that sounding board was a huge loss. It's still a huge loss. Like, there are still decisions that I make, on a regular basis where I'm like, I phone a friend to help, or it's just like becomes decision fatigue, because at the end of the day, like I am the captain of my own ship. And I really don't have that, co-captain or assistant captain or whatever that somebody in a more partnered situation experiences.
So tell me more about the first time you met Will.
Yeah. I met Will in a dive bar in Toronto. He was a friend of a friend, and he was very like sweet and conversational, and I made some arrogant remarks about having a master's degree, and I guess I made enough of an impression that the weekend after I saw him again, and kind of from like that moment on, we were pretty much inseparable.
Nice.
Yeah.
So to describe him more, like I just want, when I pick up this book, I want to, in my mind, I kind of want to have a little picture of him in my mind as I read this.
Yeah.
Who was he? Tell me about him. What was some of his weird quirks or his corny jokes, or tell me more about him.
I've never said this to anyone on a podcast, or actually like in general, only to my therapist, I think. But I think a great example of who Will was and is in my mind now is if you've ever watched The Walking Dead.
Okay.
Two, key characters. There's Daryl, who's like the motorcycle,
Mhm.
very like tough outer shell. But throughout the series, you see he does like form connections, and he has a really big heart and cares deeply for others. And then you have Rick, who's kind of like the leader of the pack, trying to do the ethical things and like save everyone and, make peace in the group. And I'd say that Will was the kind of person who wanted to be Daryl. He rode motorcycles, he was a bit of a badass and like had this like, desire to seek out all these adrenaline rushes. But in the end, he was a very good leader. He was a very good friend, and had a huge heart, and loved very deeply. Um, so if that helps you with an
Yeah.
image.
Yeah. Now we can next time we watch the show, we'll be like, okay,
Yeah,
there's Will.
there he is.
There he is right
Yeah.
on screen. That's interesting because that can actually be somewhat of a form of comfort. Just as you walk past the TV and you see it's on, you're like, oh, there he is. There's a little piece of him on the screen, and it just makes you stop and think. And I think that's the one thing that I think when you lose somebody in life is you're desperately holding on to memory.
Yes.
You're desperately holding on to experience, and you don't want to forget anything.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me and my family, losing people, but it wasn't instant like for you. It was more of a long-term illness.
Yeah.
So we had time to grieve. We had time to work through our feelings and say goodbyes over a long period of time, even though it was hard
Of course.
in that moment to go through that. I can't imagine one day it's one way with you and Will, and the next day it's a different way. I don't know, how do you, what do you do in those times when you're alone and everyone's gone home, the lasagna's on the counter getting cold, and everyone's gone back to their homes and you're there by yourself? Where do you go?
That's a great question. And I think that the answer, has evolved over time. Like what those moments alone looked like, very early after his death look very different now, nearly 4 years after it. I think in the beginning, I spent a lot of time just trying to fill the space. Whether that was like constantly having the TV on or the radio on or music on, or, I had a number of friends who would pick up the phone at any time of day if being alone was too hard. And then I think I just slowly like eased into it. I think another, layer of my story too is that, Will died at the end of 2019, and really like at the moment when I was like, you know what, I think I might try like leaving the house and doing some social things, the world shut down.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I think in that was really the moment where the isolation of being alone, I hadn't been angry yet in my grief. And lockdown really like fueled me with a deep rage. And I also
Wow.
I ultimately I had a cat, so she spent a lot of time like listening to me or just being next to me. But just over a year after Will's death, I put a deposit on a puppy, and I got a dog. And literally, it has been the hardest thing, but the best thing in my grief process, to have that like being to not only like give me love, but also to like just absorb some, maybe even all of like the desire that I have to like be next to something that is like living and breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like they're like a little emotional sponge.
Yes.
These animals, right? Even though cats don't seem to like me, dogs don't seem to love me, but cats are like, yeah, whatever. Where's my food? But dogs just seem to kind of know when you need something and just sit beside you, or they just put their head on your knee and you're like, thanks. You know, like I don't know how you know this dog human relationship. I don't know how you know that I need this right now, but there you are. You know, and that's a great moment. You know, yeah. I don't know. I wish I could have met Will. I'm just like thinking of him now.
Yeah, and I mean,
so okay, yeah.
no, I was gonna say thank you for asking about him, because I think too, like there's something that happens, and or like early on after someone dies, it's kind of like the person who died is like a taboo subject. Like you can't bring them up. And I think a lot of people do that because they're afraid that they're going to upset the person who's been most affected by that person's death. But I think a real important take home message for anyone listening to this podcast, and anybody who, you know, is wondering how to show up for someone they care about as they grieve, is that like that person is always top of mind. You know, even like in particular, even maybe even more because they are dead, you know, and you, by you speaking about them, you're not reminding someone of a person that they would rather forget. You know, I love it when people ask me questions about Will, even if you've never met him, like asking me what he would think about this, or how he did that, or, you know, what was a moment when. Those things really keep his memory alive and make me like help set a precedent for like the world that I want to live in. Because like I didn't choose to live a life without Will, and I'm not actively choosing to live a life without Will. You know, I am actively choosing to find ways of bringing him into my present, even though he isn't physically here. And that actually is more helpful than like forgetting him or like leaving him in the past. There's like clinical research that shows that, you know, if we can maintain connection with the people who are no longer present in our lives, people actually end up being more resilient after death. They've experienced, you know, deaths in their lives, rather than trying to like forget it or shove it down or pretend that they never existed. And sometimes, you know, it's hard too, because I've found that often I'm the one who has to be the leader in a group. Like I'm the one who has to say Will's name before anyone else will. And I mean, that was true early on. These days, I think I've set enough of a precedent that people know that like, hey, I want to talk about Will, particularly because I've written this book, and, you know, that's one of the threads throughout it, is that like, we need to talk about these people who made a meaningful impact and have, you know, shaped the way we view the world. But early on, like that kind of like leadership fatigue and the courage to like constantly bring it up when, you know, it's kind of like the taboo thing to do. That can really weigh on a person. Like I certainly felt it. And I would say that like some of the anger that I experienced early on was having to constantly be the leader, like knowing that, you know, Will made an impact on many people's lives, but I felt that like I was the one who was like, you know, carrying this weight, you know, trying to keep him existing in the future. It's a lot. It's a lot for one person to carry, but the more people who are willing to speak about him and ask questions about him and ask me to tell stories about him or share their own stories about him, like I live for those moments. Like those are gold to me. Those are worth more than anybody dropping off food.
Right. So who did you have envisioned in your mind sipping a cup of coffee, as you are right now, with the copy of the book in front of them, reading through this for the first time? Did you have somebody in your mind you kind of pictured that would be reading your book one day as you were writing?
I did. I have a friend, Sarah, who's, you know, my best friend, kind of like my ride or die, who I knew, like, she trusted me enough to listen to what I needed early on. And I know that if this book had existed when she got the call, when I told her that Will had died, if there was a book out there, like it would have been the first thing that she went to. So my goal in reading the book was like for the best friend. whoever you are, it's like your best friend has lost the person that they love
Okay.
nearly suddenly.
Yeah.
And you need to know what to do. Because like I could see
Yeah.
her like, scrambling, being like, what, like, do I send this? Like, I remember, so
Mhm.
Sarah and we also have another friend, Caitlin, and the three of us have been friends since grade 6. And I remember
Nice.
on
Yeah.
like, day 2 or 3, like they sent me like a gift basket, which was wonderful. But I remember like a week later, you know, I was talking to Sarah on the phone and she was like, Caitlin's asking me if we should send you another basket. And I'm like, I have enough baskets. Like, you don't have to send me another gift. I have enough cheese and crackers and like fruit to like do me for like at least a month here. But I could see
Yeah.
them, really like scrambling, being like, I like all this pent up like energy of like, I need to do something. And
Right.
it was my hope that with the book, it would give people, an outlet for that anxious energy to, read it. And then also like after they've read it, feel like they had more like confidence being in the environment with the person they are trying to support. Because I also noticed, among my support network, a lot of anxiety, a lot of people kind of dismissing their own emotions and instead kind of like putting their anxiety on trying to help me when I didn't ask for it. And I'm a pretty introverted person. I'm very particular about like who I go to for like emotional support and like being like touched and like gift, like all this. Yeah, I was like, I'm
Yeah.
super grateful, but this is all too much. And you'll read
Mhm.
about that in the book. There's a moment called the parking lot blowout where it was just like, it all came to a head and it was like
Mhm.
I need to start like saying like what it is I exactly need and you all need to start listening. So yeah, in terms of like the person that I want to read the book, the person that the book was written for is someone's like best friend who is like scrolling the internet or Instagram just looking for the answer to be like, how do I show up for this person? Like, how do I help? What do I do? Um, and hopefully, Grief Ally is the answer that they're looking for.
Yeah. So, okay. So, Aly, beyond fruit and cheese, what do we do with that anxious energy? Like we're talking about that we have to do something with it. From the book,
Mm.
can you give us a suggestion? People listening, they're like, I'm going to buy the book, obviously, but is there anything you can give us as kind of a, here's something I needed, or here's a suggestion from my perspective and from the book? What can we do with that energy?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the framework, and that is, grief isn't something that you can fix. So you shouldn't be entering the situation with like, how do I fix this for them? How do I make this better? Because that's
Okay.
not how you should approach grief support. But what you can do is you can make someone more comfortable and you can make their life easier. So that would be the framework that I would apply to any situation where you like, if you wanted to get something for someone, is like, is it going to make them more comfortable and is it going to make their life easier? So sure, food falls into that category. That's great, right? But
Yeah.
so does like a weighted blanket. Weighted blankets are, I live for a weighted blanket.
Yes.
Yes. I'm also a huge
Mhm.
proponent of like someone having like a long sweater or a long coat, so that they don't have to get dressed. You can, throw on the coat, zip it all the way from like your chin to your knees, and nobody knows like that you're wearing your pajamas
Yeah.
under there.
Yeah.
Or that, it's the same shirt you've been wearing for the last 7 days. Like it really doesn't matter, which will make someone's life easier. The comfort thing, stories provide comfort, food provides comfort, company provides comfort. Um, Cleaning someone's house makes their life easier. Like, I don't think any of the suggestions that people find when they are searching for these answers are bad or that they shouldn't be done. I think they just need to be done with more intention of, why it is that you're giving someone that thing or doing that thing for them, and recognizing that you're not doing it to fix anything or to make them feel better. You're doing it to make them more comfortable and their life more easy.
Did you ever have a chance in your short time with Will that you guys ever talked about anything like this happening in the future? Or is it so far in the future it's not even a conversation?
It wasn't even a conversation.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So then you had no idea of what he wanted. You have no idea of plans or what to do if somebody left the way it had happened. You were like completely on your own in that regard as well, which could be lonely as well, because you now have to make decisions on behalf of him and in your relationship and family, and you got to navigate everything, right? So tell me about that part.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. I mean, the best advice that I can give anyone is that, having a will is good, but having more directions than beyond who gets what is even better, in terms of what I recommend. So like I had, I like to think that I had because of the intimate nature of our relationship, that I knew Will the best. But I think also what happens when someone dies is that, everyone who had an intimate connection with him will believe that they knew him best.
Right.
And that's natural. I mean, I'm not going to deny that everybody had a different relationship with him and knew different things about him. But the challenge is that the person who is the knowledge keeper of it all is dead. And so you're trying to piece together this person based on the opinions of, several, without any veto options or someone being like, yes, that's right. And the person is like, the other being like, no, it's not. So yeah, the best advice I can give is be as clear as possible in terms of not only who gets what, but, what you want done with your body when you die, what kind of ceremony you want, who do you want there, what do you want it to look like, and not because it necessarily means a lot to you, but because it will remove conflict for the people who are still here. The people who say oh, I don't care, I'll be dead. And I was like, but you should care about the people that love you who will still be alive. Because that's where the conflict will brew.
So, okay, from your perspective then, there's people listening who have never had that conversation. We are going to live forever. We'll never have to worry about it, blah, 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 right? That's not always the case. What would you say to people in a relationship then to encourage them to have that conversation and at least have some basic idea of what each other wants? How do we even start that conversation as in our relationships with our family and our partners? How do we do that?
Yeah, I think the first step, you have to recognize it's going to take some courage to open up that conversation. Because it's not an easy one to have. It's not an easy thing to acknowledge that everyone dies. It is really the only guarantee in life. People say death and taxes, but some people don't even pay their taxes, right? So it's like you're going to die. And maybe it's just coming to terms with that first, recognizing, your mortality. And then the second one, I would be like, it doesn't have to be definite. The conversation doesn't have to be a one and done. There are some great tools. There's a kind of a game. It's called the Death Deck, and maybe I'll send you a link, Dave, so you can put it in the show notes. Yeah. But it's just it's a great little it's a stack of cards with prompts about what you want your end of life to look like. And then I think there's also another deck that's specific to what you want your arrangements to look like. And it's a great way to have the conversation, but not have to stare someone in the eye and be like, we need to talk about your death. Because that can be brutal. But then also it can be an evolution. So it can start with one conversation and then you can mull it over. So I have a living Google Doc. I have a will. My will says that, this goes to this person and this goes to X person. But I also have a living Google Doc that I share with the executor of my will. And when I think of things that I want people to do after I
in there.
die, I just type it in. And like I can say that like in the last 4 years, things have changed. So I just go in and I edit it. And it evolves with time. I'm personally like every birthday I go in there and I just review it and be like, is this still true for me? And chances are, if you are reaching the end of your life, like you might not have updated it within like the past 3 months, but you may not have evolved so much that it is completely untrue. But at least it becomes a guide for the person who is in charge of making those decisions. And I'm a huge believer in the fact that like people evolve and change over time. So I don't want it to be a static document. But just know that you can make one and make sure that somebody knows about it.
That is a super amazing idea. I have never heard anybody say that before. Aly, I think that is super smart. Even little things like we have a social media footprint now, and we have all of our logins and we have all of our stuff.
Exactly.
And, well, what's going to happen to all this that we have? And who has your password to do whatever, right? Like,
yeah, that's all in there.
That's so hard.
These are the bank accounts I have. These are all my email addresses.
Wow.
Yeah, but then it's also like more specific things. Like, I want you to have a funeral, 2 weeks after my death. There isn't a color scheme. Like, you don't have to wear black, but my favorite color was black, so it's okay. And I think one particular thing that is very clear in this document is that at my funeral, I want people to clap. I think my experience at funerals are very like somber events. And I recognize that, there is a somberness to them, but I think also like people put their heart and souls into words that they create to speak at memorials. And the fact that we don't clap for them is like heart-wrenching to me. So I want people to clap. And that, like, how would anybody know that? Like, I could say it verbally and I could hope that, people will remember it on the day of, but like having a document that says like, Aly wants people to clap at her funeral, that could be like put in a little booklet that everybody gets as they like walk to their seats. It's like, so the one person who's clapping is like, oh no, I heard her say that, when she was 35 years old, she wanted people to clap at her funeral. And people give them dirty looks. It's like, no, it's in writing. And it's very clear about what I want.
Okay, so before you met Will, there's Aly, and Aly's got a path for life. You know who you are. You know what you want to be, what you want to do. You meet Will, amazing guy. Life changes. After Will passed away, and after he died, there's a new Aly. How different is the new Aly from the old Aly? Or is it night and day? Is it still the same Aly? Tell me the difference.
That's a great question. We are different. There are a few pieces that are similar, and there are a few pieces that are just gone. But grief changes people. Fact. Grief changes people. And the funny thing is that like I like the person I am today, and I think grief has like sent me on a journey of like some deep radical self-acceptance of like, oh, like you really know who you are after you experience trauma, and what you need in life to be okay. For example, I like when Will was alive, I used to have this dream of being this like, well-paid, nomadic kind of person who could like live and work anywhere in the world. After Will's death, I'm like, no, I need a home base. I need to be able to drink coffee every morning, preferably outside with my dog next to me. And like, that is quality of life for me. Traveling the world, being in environments that are constantly foreign, like it is exhausting, particularly because like living with grief is exhausting, right? Like every day trying to navigate these like emotional and physical ups and downs that I never asked for and took a long time to figure out how to interpret, like a new language. I'm like, I don't need to leave this country. I don't need to like leave this town. Like I am a homebody through and through. Um, so yeah, there's been this like level of like radical self-acceptance, um, to a point where I think I know who I am more than I have ever known who I was. Um, Partially that's because I am a person who appreciates, self-reflection and doing a lot of research about what grief is and how it impacts people physiologically and psychologically and emotionally, um, has been a thing that I've kind of held on to in terms of trying to understand what was happening to myself. And that has just come at the, yeah, a benefit of that has become knowing myself better. Um, and I like myself now. I like myself more than I ever have. I was a bit of like a bully in terms of like what I expected from myself in terms of what I expected from others. And I think through this like grieving process, through this, radical self-acceptance, there's like come some peace with it and like treating myself how I would treat others. Which is new for me. And because of that, yeah, I ultimately I like myself more. And further to that point, like anybody would say like, wow, then like it must be, this must have been meant for you, or you must be, grateful at some level, that this happened to you. And to that, I say, hell no.
You're right. Come on.
I we don't have to get into a spiritual conversation, but I fully believe that like I was still a good person when Will was alive. I would have had a great life with him. We would have done some incredible things. And life would have been great. Do I still have hopes now? Like, after a long period of, not knowing what kind of future I would have, like I see a future for myself now and I'm like, yeah, like I can still have a great life. And I recognize that I can do that, but there is not an ounce of gratitude in my body for what I had to go through to get to this point. Yeah.
Interesting. So the one thing you and I both have in common is introvert.
Yeah.
I am an introvert. I love being by myself. I am totally fine in the corner, just being me. Big events make me nauseous. Big crowds, people doting over you and don't touch me. Like you said, don't touch me. Is that dangerous though, when people are trying to reach out and trying to show they care and demonstrate love and care for you and concern? Because for me, like when I lost one of my relatives, I know there was like this big moment of time, maybe a month, where everybody seems to be around.
Yeah.
You're getting calls and emails and people dropping by, lasagnas and fruit and vegetables and all that. But then that stops and you're at home by yourself and their stuff is there. And you look at your phone and you're just wishing it would ring.
Yeah.
And you'd see their name on there, just one more time. You listen to voicemails and you look at emails or whatever, pictures. And in that moment, I kind of regretted pushing some people away in my introvertness, saying, it's too much for me. But when they were all gone and back to their lives and back to work and doing their regular day, I was by myself. And I needed them then, like 2 months in, 3 months, 4 months in. That's when I needed them more.
Yeah.
And I kind of regretted pushing them away initially.
Yeah.
Because I don't like that feeling of them being in my face. Did you feel that at all?
Yes and no. So
okay,
I can totally relate to the like peak expression of support and then a milder like near silence level. For me, I think this is in part because Will's death was so sudden. Like I was, in kind of like a survival state early on, shock. And I didn't feel anything early on, but being the like introverted, like empathetic person I am, I learned that I was fawning in the crisis. And someone who fawns in a crisis, is very much a people pleaser. So like, and this is kind of a trend in my life. Like I have been a people pleaser in the past, and I'm very tuned into what other people are feeling emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
So early on in that process, I was acutely aware that everyone was kind of flowing to me because of that anxious energy that I mentioned earlier. And another like factor in mine and Will's relationship was that we lived in BC and the majority of our family and friends were in Ontario. So there was this rush of people who wanted to come to BC, wanted to be next to me. And I had the foresight, my brain could, to say like, please don't come now. Like I am going to need you later. And there were people who listened.
Good.
So yes, there was a incredible surge. And to be fair, like, I think like I didn't really feel the probably for like the first 6 weeks after Will's death, like I thought that I was going to be okay. And I think that surge of support really provided some protective features in terms of like I felt very supported. I felt that like if there was anything that I needed, I could call someone and they would show up. The biggest kind of learning curve for me was like after that 6 weeks was asking for help. And not exclusive to like knowing when I like what I needed to be helped, but more just a willingness to like say that I'm not okay. And I am fortunate enough to have a number of people in my life who like kept checking in and being like, what's happening like right now. And I'm like, I don't know, like, I'm not okay. And they're like, well, I can offer, this, and this. And I'm like, okay, like, let's try option C, and see what happens. Which is also something that I offer in the book is that, you don't have to be helpful, like within that first month or that first 6 weeks. Like grief lasts forever. You will get your shot at grief support. So just kind of like hold on. And I guarantee you that one day, whatever resource and assets that you can apply to the situation, like they will be needed and you will get to use them. Because I think a lot of people, if they're not called upon for help within that first period of time, that acute, tough moment, they kind of throw up their hands and like, oh, okay, well, they're fine. They don't need me, which isn't true. Yeah. It's just like, it is overwhelming, particularly for introverted people, in that moment to try and manage like, the 17 different people who are like, hey, how are you? Yeah.
Love it. I have another question to ask you at the end here, Aly, that I want to end off with. But before I do that, I love the website again. It's beautiful. And I want everyone to go there and I want them to all buy the book and gift the book to somebody as well. I think that would be a good idea.
Absolutely.
Tell us about the website and where you are on social media and all that great stuff. I got another question for you after that.
All right. Yeah. My website is super easy. It is alybird.com, ALYBIRD.com. And you can find me on social media at the Aly Bird. On Instagram and Facebook.
There you go. The one thing that I heard in the beginning clip that we played from your website for the book promo, you made mention there about how do we not make this worse?
Yeah.
How do we not make this worse for the people around someone dealing with loss? What is one of the keys to not make it worse? What do we do? Or what do we not do?
I think the worst thing that you can do is abandon someone. I think the worst thing that you can do is say like, this is too hard for me to try and support someone through, and make them lose you in addition to this loved one who has died. So staying silent, abandoning them because of your own discomfort. I recognize that, some people have, their own trauma and their own stuff to work through. And there may be moments when they need to take care of themselves. And that's totally fine. But not saying anything, not doing anything, not reaching out at all, is how you make it worse. You're going to show up, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to say the wrong thing sometimes. That will not make it worse. I guarantee it. If you are willing to show up, make mistakes, but keep coming back and learning from them, like that is the best kind of support that your person who are you supporting can hope for, as they learn how to live around the legacy of this person in their life who has died.
Knowing Will the way you do, what do you think he would think of all this? The book, everything. What would he say to all this?
That's a great question. I think he'd be really proud of me. I think he would. Yeah. He was a great champion of any crazy idea that I had. And yeah, he would be really proud of me that I have made it this far and done with what I have with the circumstances that I have been given.
And I think it goes beyond that as well. Like, I think he'd be proud of you, the fact that you're helping other people at the same time.
Thank you.
Right. That you're it's helping you personally, but by you sharing your story with the world, someone's going to pick up this book. And I've been reading the reviews. It's there in the reviews. Somebody's going to pick up this book who just needed that book at that time.
Yeah.
Or they know somebody who needs this book right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the one thing that's going to make a huge difference in their life. And had you not committed to sharing this story with us, those people would never have been helped in that way. So that's something I think he'd be proud of you for as well.
You're so right. Thank you, Dave. That means a lot.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it. Everyone, please go buy the book. Support Aly. Go check out the video again on the book tab of her website. It's beautiful. You heard it at the beginning, and I want you to go there and just watch it again. And then, again, go buy the book. Leave an amazing review wherever you buy it online, so everyone else knows how amazing it is as well. And let Aly know that you heard her here on Living the Next Chapter. Aly, thank you for making time for me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jumping here at the very end, I want to thank you for coming. We have listeners around the world, and I got to tell you, as a podcaster, it is so great to hear back from the people who listen to the show. Now, you are still here. The podcast's over. Like, we're sweeping up and putting the chairs away. You're still here. So, hi. I would love to talk to you. Oh, no, I really, really would. I would love to hear your voice. I would love to hear from you through email. You can do all that at livingthenextchapter.com. I say it fast because I love it. Living the Next Chapter. It's the name of the podcast. .com. How's that for easy? Right? Right. So come on over there and let's have a conversation. You can set up time in my calendar. You can, air quote here, book. Book time in my calendar. Book next chapter. Let's have a conversation. Thanks for being here. See you on the next one. Cheers.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.